On January 16th, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. This marks the first time since 2017 that a Canadian Prime Minister has set foot on Chinese soil. It's a move widely seen as Canada's strategic rebalancing towards China as a hedge against Trumping-style uncertainty. 4 days later, Mark Carney delivered a special address at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he talked about a rupture in the world order, criticized major powers and called on middle powers to work together to build a more cooperative and resilient world. Let's take a look.
But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together. That is Canada's path. We choose it openly and confidently, and it is a path wide open to any country willing to take it with us.
Canada has always been one of America's most steadfast partners. Is that changing though? And is Canada reconsidering its position between the US-China great power rivalry? And finally, how should middle powers survive and thrive in this emerging world order of uncertainty internationally? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I am Wen-Ti Song. To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by two very distinguished guests today. First, we have Roland Fu, Assistant Research Fellow for Political Science at the Academia Sinica. And I also have Charles Wu, Professor of Diplomacy at the National Cheng Chi University. Everyone, welcome to the show. Roland, Charles.
Hi, Wen. Thank you.
So let us take you back to 2018. Canada arrested Chinese tech giant Huawei senior executive Meng Wanzhou. Shortly afterward, China also detained two Canadian citizens on espionage charges, sending Canada-China relations to a low point, and years of acrimony followed between the two sides. However, after US President Donald Trump came back into power, the US imposed high tariff on its long-standing ally Canada and made provocative remarks about turning Canada into America's 51st state. Feeling its economy and sovereignty are under pressure from the US, Canada seems to be reconsidering its options at the moment. Indeed, during the Canadian Prime Minister's latest visit to Beijing, China and Canada reached agreements on reciprocal tariff and EV electric vehicle imports, advancing a new strategic partnership. Among the deliverables from the trip are EV and tariff. Let's take a look.
加方将给予中国电动汽车每年4.9万辆的配额，配额内享受6.1%的最惠国关税待遇，不再征收100%附加税，配额数量将按一定比例逐年增长。
So I want to come to you first, Charles, for a brief overview. What do you see as the main diplomatic deliverables from this Canadian PM's trip to Beijing? And how do you feel about the timing behind this decision and the fact that especially came just 4 days before Canadian Prime Minister visited Davos for that rupture speech?
I think first, when you talk about Canadian and American bilateral relations, Trump tried to harass the Canadian government and want to put them into a 51st states, which I think really led the Canadian people get very angry. And then Trump also raised the tariffs from 25 to 35 last August and warned to give their iron and also steel about 50% of tariffs. I think the bilateral relation between Canada and the United States is getting more and more serious. And windows open, then Carney visited China. I think they tried to reach some trade agreements. For example, the canola seeds and oil. Probably China will buy more from Canada and give them about 6.1 tariffs, which is much lower than before. During Trudeau's government is about 81% of tariffs on the canola seeds. So, like I say, Carney wants to develop his more we call the third way, more different options related to heavily dependent on the United States. We know that Canada and the United States, their bilateral trade relation was quite close. Last year, the total trade amount from the United States dropped from 77 to 67, United States to Canada, which is historical low. Why? Because Trump wants to raise the tariffs. So like what I say, we can see Carney this time, he wants to develop his own diplomatic way, the path, and try to show Trump, we are not afraid of you.
Okay, Ronan, you have something to add?
Just want to add on Charles' point and to point out the main takeaway of this entire trip. I would argue that the main takeaway is Canada is trying to doing some signaling, signaling that it is should be considered as an independent country. Its independence should be appreciated and acknowledged. It is no longer positioning itself as America's junior partner or even worse, like agent. It is like just Charles said, we are going to pave our own way towards something. So we are going to control the uncertainty coming from the United States.
All right, I think a common theme from both of you is that Canada is trying to assert that it's an independent player of its own right in that sense, and China may be trying to find ways to draw a contrast between how China is treating Canada at the time when Trump may be treating Canada somewhat differently.
That's right.
I want to come to you, Roland, for next question. We talk about the more, foreign policy side. What about the more economic deliverables from this Canadian PM's trip to Beijing? I know that there's a ETCR that's getting signed. That's Canada-China Economic and Trade Cooperation Roadmap, for example, when again they'll focus on lowering barriers for Chinese EVs going into Canada, as well as access for Canadian canola energy that Charles kind of referred to earlier. What's your assessment here about the econ side of the equation?
Yeah, from the economic side of the story, basically the roadmap is modest in scale, but looms very large in terms of symbolism. It really symbols that Canada is trying to explore some other possibilities, possibly other than the United States. So basically, this entire thing will allow up to like 49,000 Chinese EVs a year, at a normal tariff, right? So but still, this only represent less than 3% of the Canada's car market. So the figure itself is modest, but like I say, it's symbolically important. And in return, China is expected to ease restrictions on some of the Canadian goods. It's going to restore a multi-billion-dollar market for Canadian markets. So despite the fact that the figure is modest in its scale, but what if it's actually just like an opening towards something greater, right? So overall, I would still argue that it's not free trade. It's more like manage reciprocity. Carney is actually trying to manage something that is under Canada's control. They want to actually explore new possibilities, but I do not think that it's like a structural change. It's like a contingency plan. It's like a case by case that we obviously can cooperate, but we are going to cooperate first and see how it goes, and we are going to decide later on what to actually do in the future.
Right, so it sounds like maybe small wins in substance terms for now, but it carries symbolism that may potentially explore more openings down the road in that sense.
Yeah, that's my take.
I want to come back to Charles for next question here. So we talk about autonomy strategically for Canada here, and indeed, if you look at Carney's speech in Davos, for example, he talked about the world is in rupture, the old order is broken, and that Canada and middle power should develop more strategic autonomy along the lines of what he calls principled pragmatism that accept the world as it is. What's your reading on that? Would you mind elaborate a little bit more on that notion?
Like I say, Carney mentioned that they probably want to deviate from the United States on the economic sphere, and he wants to do his own way, Canadian way. For example, within the 6 months, Canadian government already signed about 12 agreements with other countries, for example, in Indonesia, and also like China, EU, and Qatar. And this year, I think they were going to sign more agreements with other countries, for example, Philippines, India, UAE, Ecuador, and ASEAN countries. Like I say, after the China visit, Carney is going to visit India, which I think he wants to improve the bilateral relation between Canadian government and India, because we know during the Trudeau governments, the bilateral relation was very, very bad. Okay, but like what I say, whether it's possible for Carney to develop the third way, John Mearsheimer mentioned that. Okay, he said no way. when great power, which is two great power, decided, you are pushed to join either side. So like what I say, like he say, sorry, not my say, he say, Trump is going to form his own regulars, rules, norms, okay, and he want his allies to follow the rules on his economic coercions. So you either join United States or you will ship to China's side. For example, China uses what we call BRI, okay, Asian Infrastructure Bank, and also like Shanghai SCO. China is also trying to form in their kind of pillar. So John mentioned that the two-pillar system will still dominate the international order. And is it possible for this kind of middle power like Canadian or European unions to develop the third pillar? Based on John Mearsheimer's ideas, is impossible. So like I say, it's still a lot of challenges for Carney in his term.
Yeah. I love that reference for sure to John Mearsheimer's, I guess, polarity determinism in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roland, I see you have your hands up.
So I also want to suggest that so all the discussion so far does not really imply that Canada is actually abandoning the U.S. The U.S. will remain still a very, very important actor in Canadian politics and also in how the Canadian government think of the entire like world affairs and how to actually navigate the future. But I also agree with Charles that it's going to be a very difficult decision to make, and sometimes the structure doesn't really allow you to pursue a lot of agency. But my prediction is that this is what the Canadian government is very likely to do. They are going to actually make no definite decision. They will try to actually kick the can down the road, referring itself from making very, very painful and definite decision. They will actually try to do the hedging game, play the hedging game, so that sometimes they will try to make it very looks very appealing in front of the American side, but it will also try to actually sometimes dance with China.
That is fascinating. I like how Charles sort of talked about the economic diversification part about Canada signing, was it 12 FTA with 12 countries within the first 12 months. And you talk about, I guess, Mearsheimer and strategic autonomy here and about kicking the can down the road. A natural question that flows from that is then, is this approach towards strategic autonomy between the two superpowers a long-term viable strategy, you feel, or is it more of a temporary show and see where things go, sort of a temporary fix?
Yeah, so that depends on whether you can actually accept a possibility or actually trying to entertain the possibility where, so China is considered as a very important polar. The U.S. is another polar, so that's the reason why you have a bipolar system. But some people actually argue that what we're going to witness in the future is a structure with no dominant power. So in that description, basically like EU, India, and maybe even Brazil, they will also try to exert some influence on the international system. In that regard, China and the United States are just two very important, actors. So that's one possible imagination. But I think a more realistic situation in the foreseeable future is still that the United States and China basically they are the dominant powers. So what you are going to see is like an intensified bipolar system, or a bipolar system that still remain basically some cooperation, among different, countries. So does that really mean that, for example, countries like Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Malaysia, they are actually allowed to freely, navigate between U.S. and China? That remains to be seen. Yeah.
It sounds like there are two broad possibility scenario that's being raised here. One is more Mearsheimean, if you will, bipolarity, determinism. One is more of almost a, if not non-polarity, maybe more of a bipolarity light that enables more scope for different experiments. That's right. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. I guess U.S. part of the equation here. So angered by Canada reaching an economic agreement with China, U.S. President Donald Trump actually issued a warning on social media almost right after, saying that if Canada proceeds with a deal with China, the U.S. will impose a 100% tariff on Canadian goods exported to the U.S. Let's take a look. So he said, if Governor Carney thinks he's going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the US, he is sorely mistaken. China will eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA. Those were some sobering words coming from President Trump towards Canada. And I want to come to Charles, I think, for my next question here. So there are structural risks in U.S.-Canada relations that some observers have highlighted. Indeed, if you look at this threat of 100% tariff, you look at how President Trump has mentioned this idea of downward doctrine, for example. Do you feel like Canada is at the moment reframing the way it's looking at U.S. at the moment? Like, is U.S.'s image in Canadian thinking increasingly shifting from that of a dependable security guarantor into more of a potential threat to Canadian economic situation and perhaps territorial integrity here? Like, how bad is the situation?
I think Carney still has his wisdom. He's not like trying to totally kind of break out with the United States, because he reiterated again. He say right now the Canada and China's trade agreement is not a comprehensive trade agreement. It hasn't finished yet. Okay. And I think he wants to leave some rooms for United States and Canada's bilateral relations, because he wants to stay in the United States security sphere, because it's still Five Eyes, no rat. There's a lot of things United States and Canada, they build up on the security relationship. So Carney is smart. He tried to use China as a bargaining chips and try to throw it into a kind of renewing the upcoming USMCA review, because we know there's a review on the USMCA in this year. So he tried to iterate again. If Trump keep continuing using the tariff as a kind of big sticks, we will try to give China an MFN, and we will try to use the USMCA clause 32.10, okay, which I think is very serious. Okay, then this we can see Carney he want to at least grab some bargaining chips on his hand when facing Trump's continuing economic coercions in the following days.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Roland, please.
If I may, then so to put it in a very straightforward term, then Canada is not going to leave the U.S. security umbrella. They want to, like Charles just said, they want to stay within the domain of security. But Canada is also very clearly hedging against American economic coercion.
Thank you for that. And I think a related question that's brought about by Charles's comment is basically more autonomy and more agency for Canada might, to the U.S., mean slightly less dependable ally from the U.S. perspective.
Yeah.
So how do you feel Canada is going about finding ways for more agency for itself without chipping away its relationship with the U.S.?
It's going to be very difficult, but still they have to try. So what they are trying to accomplish is, on the one hand, to reassure, Washington on NORAD and, Five Eyes, while opening tightly defined economic space with China. So the tricky part is that, basically, the United States can actually interpret this kind of, movement as like a betrayal. So the U.S. can actually get very angry and get very upset about this. So what Ottawa can do is actually just try to highlight cooperation with some other middle powers, such as EU, Japan, and Australia, and trying to say that this is actually trying to explore a lot of different possibilities. So it's not just about China, because if it's only China, then I think Ottawa, we have a problem, or we should say Houston. Basically, if it's only China, then the United States will actually just inevitably interpret that as like a very brutal betrayal. There's no way for other interpretation. But if it's China, EU, Japan, Australia, then still reserve some room for different interpretations, so that some of the Canadian reassurance might still work, right? But still, I think that my prediction is that going forward, Ottawa is going to face a lot of pressure coming from the United States.
I want to go to the next topic, which is much more about, I guess, challenges in managing relation with China. So for Canada, the U.S. tariff policy and the Monroe Doctrine, or rather the Monroe Doctrine now, are pushing allies toward rethinking about where they should stand or want to stand on the U.S.-China relations spectrum. And Beijing is seizing this opportunity to actively change its tie with other countries as finding a way to project goodwill in the hope of stealing perhaps a partnership or two away from the U.S. Let's take a look.
中加关系健康稳定发展，符合我们两国的共同利益，也有利于世界和平稳定和发展繁荣。我愿继续同你一道努力，本着对历史、对人民、对世界负责任的态度，推动中加关系迈入健康稳定可持续的发展轨道，更好地造福两国人民。
So I want to come to Roland for the next question.
Yeah.
In pure interest, it makes sense, of course, to have as many friends and patrons you can get for Canada, of course, just like it is true for many countries. But when it comes to China and Canada, there's the issue of value differences, namely that a number of observers have mentioned that Canada, of course, being a liberal democracy, and China has more of a authoritarian polity, and what that may mean is that they are some foreign issues, be it long-arm jurisdiction, transnational repression, or other normative differences in their exchanges. So I'm wondering, how do you think Canada can or is going about finding ways to make sure strategic autonomy is compatible with Canada's continued assertion of its international status as normative power?
Yeah, will be extremely challenging. And here's why. So basically, human rights groups, they urge Ottawa to raise concerns like forced labor, the issue of forced labor and transactional repression exercised by China or CCP in particular. Yet what we are witnessing is actually Canadian official readouts. They actually emphasize trade and climate. While values are largely absent, right? So basically, people will say, you claim yourself to be a normative power, and look at your deed. Basically, you are trying to use China to come to your rescue for short-term economic contingency, right? So it's actually not trying to help you build resilience, and then you're afraid of American economic coercion, but how do you actually ignore the possibility that Chinese economic coercion is something that you should also take into account, let alone the forced labor or the transnational repression issue that we just talked about, right? So that's the reason why I believe that Canadian government is going to face a very difficult, a very daunting task. And here's my prediction in terms of what they are going to say. They will say their relationship with China is just like contemporary. It's not like a structural fixed, because if they are going to be friends with China no matter what, then that is actually saying no to their past. They will stop trying to become or trying to be a normative power. We're just going to be like a chant to the Canadian identity, being a normative power, trying to value, for example, trying to actually keep the like-mindedness dream alive, right? So to keep that dream alive, Canadian government really needs to figure out, how to actually, on the one hand, maintain some, interests intact, and at the same time, trying to actually make sure that people don't consider China as a hypocritical country. Yeah.
So we're recording in Taiwan, so one natural question to ask is about what does this mean for Taiwan, of course. Canada and China, they are pursuing this, what seems to be a rapprochement here. And Charles, do you feel like this warming Canada-China tie will potentially mean a slowdown in terms of Canada-Taiwan engagement, be it diplomatic engagement, be it perhaps Canadian involvement in foreign ops, for example, in the region? What's your assessment here?
I think, the basic spirits and also principle of Canada is pretty similar to Taiwan. They pay attention to human rights, all the kind we call, liberal ideas and liberal values. For example, I want to add up something like, Canada government previously used to condemn China on, for example, Hong Kong issues. Mm-hmm. So they care about the national security law on Hong Kong. They care about the Jimmy Lai, Li Zhiying's case. Okay, and even the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melania Joly, okay, she condemned China executed 4 Canadian people in China. And I think those are very critical cases and issues which lie in front of China and Canada in the future. Okay, they still need to solve this kind of we call human rights sensitivity issues. But I think Carney, he has his wisdom how to kind of solve this kind of human rights critical issues between these two governments. I think he will try to lower down the debate on this. And Taiwan, I think we still need to say, for example, Taiwan and Canada, we follow and we obey, we cherish the value of democracy, we pay attention to the rule of law, we want the freedom of speech, something like that. This is how we can connect with Canada. And we know that Taiwan, we imported a lot of soybeans from Canada too. So how can we maintain the bilateral relation with Canada by buying more soybeans, which I think is more important.
Thank you for that. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. But I would like to thank you both so much for sharing your time, your expertise with us and our audience. Thank you so much, Ronan, Charles.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. I'll see you next time.